He sat in his $10,000 suit, laughing at his wife in court, thinking he'd already won the divorce by freezing her accounts and leaving her with nothing. He mocked her, called her pathetic, told the judge she was too broke to even hire a lawyer. Then the doors swung open, and the legendary attorney who walked in wasn't just any lawyer. She was her mother. And in the next 60 minutes, she destroyed him. This is the most satisfying courtroom revenge you'll ever see. Watch till the end. Marcus Reynolds thought the divorce was already over. He thought freezing Sarah's accounts meant she would crumble. He even told the judge she was too incompetent to hire proper counsel. But Marcus forgot one crucial detail about Sarah's past. Specifically, who gave birth to her. When the courtroom doors of the Manhattan Civil Courthouse swung open and she walked in, the smirk didn't just vanish from Marcus's face. The color drained from his entire existence. You are about to witness the most brutal courtroom takedown in New York history. The air inside courtroom 304 of the New York County Supreme Court was stale, smelling faintly of floor wax, old legal briefs, and the broken dreams of failed marriages. It was the scent of endings. For Marcus Reynolds, however, the atmosphere smelled like victory. Marcus adjusted the cuffs of his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, the navy fabric catching the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. Leaning back in the leather chair at the plaintiff's table, he checked his watch, a rose gold Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's annual salary, and let out a sharp, derisive exhale through his nose. "She's late," Marcus whispered to the man beside him, his voice dripping with contempt. Or maybe she finally realized it's cheaper to just give up and disappear. Beside him sat Gerald Hutchins. Gerald wasn't just a lawyer. He was a weapon. Senior partner at Hutchins, Blackwell and Associates, he was known in Manhattan legal circles as the executioner of Fifth Avenue. He didn't just win divorce cases. He obliterated the opposition until there was nothing left but ash, tears, and a settlement so one-sided it made prenups look generous. Gerald smoothed his charcoal Hermes tie, his cold gray eyes scanning the docket with predatory boredom. "It doesn't matter if she shows up, Marcus," Gerald murmured, his voice like gravel grinding on glass. "We filed the emergency motion to freeze the joint assets on Monday morning. She has no access to liquidity. No retainer means no representation. No representation against me means she walks away with whatever scraps we decide to toss her." Marcus smirked, looking across the aisle to the defendant's table. Sitting there alone was Sarah. Sarah Reynolds looked smaller than Marcus remembered. Her dark brown skin seemed dull under the unforgiving courtroom lights, her natural hair pulled back into a simple bun. She wore a modest charcoal gray dress, one she'd owned for years, one Marcus used to mock her for keeping because it was outdated and cheap-looking. Her hands were folded neatly on the scarred oak table, her fingers interlaced so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale beneath her melanin-rich skin. There were no stacks of files in front of her. No paralegals whispering strategy. No pitcher of ice water. Just Sarah, staring straight ahead at the empty judge's bench, her jaw set with a quiet determination that Marcus mistook for defeat. "Look at her," Marcus chuckled, loud enough for the few spectators in the gallery to hear. "Pathetic. I almost feel bad for her. It's like watching a deer waiting for a semi-truck on the FDR drive." "Focus," Gerald warned, though a small smile played on his thin lips. "Judge Patterson is a stickler for decorum. Let's get this done quickly. I have a lunch reservation at Lou Bernardine at 1 o'clock. "Don't worry, Gerald," Marcus said, his voice oozing confidence. "By 1 o'clock, I'll be a free man, and she'll be looking for a studio apartment in the Bronx. Hell, maybe even Jersey City." The bailiff, a heavy-set black man named Officer James Washington, who had seen enough divorces to lose faith in humanity 3 times over, bellowed out in a booming voice that echoed off the mahogany-paneled walls, "All rise." The Honorable Judge Patricia Patterson presiding. The room shuffled to its feet with the sound of rustling fabric and creaking chairs. Judge Patricia Patterson swept in, her black robes billowing behind her like a cape. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp cheekbones, silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, and eyes that could cut through steel. She was known throughout the New York legal system for clearing her docket with ruthless efficiency and having zero tolerance for nonsense. She took her seat behind the bench, adjusted her wire-rimmed spectacles, and peered down at the parties with the expression of someone who had heard every lie, every excuse, and every sob story twice. "Be seated," Judge Patterson commanded, her voice crisp and authoritative. The room obeyed. She opened the thick manila file in front of her, her perfectly manicured nails, painted a professional burgundy, tapping the wood. Case number 2024, D. 09172. Reynolds versus Reynolds. We are here for the preliminary hearing regarding division of marital assets and the petition for spousal support. Judge Patterson looked toward the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Hutchins, good to see you again." "And you, Your Honor," Gerald said, standing smoothly, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. "We are ready to proceed." The judge turned her gaze to the defense table. She frowned, her brow furrowing. "Mrs. Reynolds," Judge Patterson said, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "I see you are appearing alone. Are you expecting counsel?" Sarah stood up slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table for support. Her voice was soft, but there was an edge of steel beneath it. "I am, Your Honor. She should be here any minute." Marcus let out a loud, theatrical scoff. He covered his mouth with his hand, but the sound was unmistakable. Mocking, cruel, designed to humiliate. Judge Patterson's sharp eyes darted to Marcus. "Is there something amusing, Mr. Reynolds?" Gerald Hutchins stood up immediately, placing a restraining hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Apologies, Your Honor. My client is simply frustrated. This process has been unnecessarily prolonged, and the emotional strain is significant." "Keep your client's frustration silent, Mr. Hutchins," the judge warned, her tone icy. "Or I will find a holding cell where he can express it freely." She turned back to Sarah. "Mrs. Reynolds, court began 5 minutes ago. You are aware of the procedural rules. If your attorney is not present—" "She's coming," Sarah insisted, her voice gaining a fraction more strength. "There was traffic on the West Side Highway. She texted me. She's almost here." "Traffic," Marcus muttered, leaning forward so his voice carried across the aisle. "Or maybe the check bounced, Sarah." "Oh wait, you can't write a check. I canceled all the cards this morning. Even the one for groceries." A few people in the gallery gasped quietly. "Mr. Reynolds." Judge Patterson banged her gavel hard, the sound cracking like a whip. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. Do I make myself clear?" "My apologies, Your Honor," Marcus said, standing up and buttoning his jacket with exaggerated politeness. I want to be fair here. My wife is clearly confused. She doesn't understand the complexity of the law. She has no income, no resources, no education in these matters. I offered her a generous settlement last week, $50,000 and the 2018 Lexus. She refused." Marcus turned to look at Sarah, his blue eyes cold and dead. "I tried to help you, Sarah. But you insisted on playing games you don't understand. Now look at you, sitting there with nothing. You don't have a lawyer because nobody wants a charity case. Nobody wants to represent someone who can't pay." Sarah's hands tightened on the table. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "Mr. Hutchins," Judge Patterson snapped, "control your client, or I will do it for you." "Your Honor," Gerald Hutchins interjected smoothly, standing with the calm authority of a man who had done this 1,000 times. While my client's passion is regrettable, his point is legally valid. We are wasting the court's valuable time. Mrs. Reynolds clearly has not secured representation. Under the precedent of Vargas v. State, we move to proceed immediately with a default judgment on the asset division. She has had 3 months to prepare. Judge Patterson looked at Sarah. She looked tired. Mrs. Reynolds, Mr. Hutchins is technically correct. The court's time is valuable. If you cannot produce an attorney right now, I have to assume you are representing yourself pro se, and given the complexity of the forensic accounting involved in your husband's real estate portfolio, she paused. That would be extremely ill-advised. I am not representing myself, Sarah said, her eyes fixed on the double mahogany doors at the back of the courtroom. Please, Your Honor. Just 2 more minutes. She's here. I know she is. She's stalling, Marcus hissed loudly. She's got nobody. Her father was a janitor in Harlem, and her friends are all teachers and social workers. Who is she going to call? The NAACP hotline. A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Even Gerald looked mildly embarrassed. Marcus laughed again, a cruel barking sound that echoed off the marble columns. He felt invincible, untouchable. He looked at Sarah, the black woman he had vowed to love and cherish 12 years ago, and saw only an obstacle he was about to crush. He wanted to humiliate her. He wanted her to know that leaving him was the biggest mistake of her life. He wanted her broken. Your Honor, Gerald pressed, sensing the kill. I move to strike her request for a continuance. Let's end this charade. Judge Patterson sighed. She picked up her gavel. Mrs. Reynolds, I'm sorry. We cannot wait any longer. We will proceed with... Bam! The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a force that rattled the frames and sent a gust of cool hallway air rushing into the stuffy room. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the marble halls of justice. Everyone turned. Marcus spun around in his chair, annoyed at the interruption. Gerald Hutchins frowned, his gold pen hovering over his yellow legal pad. Officer Washington straightened up, his hand instinctively moving toward his belt. The courtroom fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Standing in the doorway was not a frazzled public defender. It was not a cheap strip mall lawyer. It was not some overworked legal aid attorney juggling 30 cases. Standing there, framed by the afternoon light streaming through the hallway windows, was a woman who looked to be in her late 60s, though her posture was as rigid and commanding as a Marine Corps general. She wore a tailored white Chanel suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage payment. Her silver hair was cut into a sharp, terrifyingly precise bob. She wore dark Dior sunglasses, which she slowly removed with one perfectly manicured hand, revealing eyes of piercing, ice-cold authority. Her skin was a rich, deep brown, the same tone as Sarah's, and carried the kind of elegance that comes from decades of commanding boardrooms, courtrooms, and congressional hearings. Behind her walked 3 junior associates, 2 women and 1 man, all impeccably dressed, all carrying thick leather briefcases embossed with gold initials. They moved in a tight V formation, like fighter jets escorting a bomber on a precision strike. The woman didn't rush. She walked down the center aisle with a measured rhythmic click of her Louboutin heels sounding like a metronome counting down Marcus's remaining time on Earth. Gerald Hutchins, the executioner of Fifth Avenue, dropped his gold pen. It clattered onto the table. His mouth opened slightly. His face, usually a mask of smug arrogance, went pale. "No," Gerald whispered, genuine fear creeping into his voice. That's impossible." "Who is that?" Marcus asked, confused by his lawyer's sudden panic. "Is that her mom? Sarah told me her mom was dead." Gerald didn't answer. He just stared. The woman reached the defense table. She didn't look at Sarah. She didn't look at the judge. She turned slowly, like a lioness surveying prey, and looked directly at Marcus Reynolds. She smiled. But it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile a predator gives before it tears into flesh. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her voice smooth, cultured, projecting to every corner of the room without needing a microphone. "I had to file a few emergency motions with the appellate division regarding your offshore holdings, Mr. Reynolds. It took longer than expected to list all 14 of your hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands." Marcus froze. Judge Patterson leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Counselor, state your name for the record." The woman placed a gold-embossed business card on the stenographer's desk with a soft tap. She turned to the judge. "Catherine Elise Bennett," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "Senior Managing Partner at Bennett, Crown & Sterling of Washington, D.C. I am entering my appearance as counsel for the defendant, Mrs. Sarah Reynolds." She paused. Then she looked at Marcus again, her dark eyes burning with controlled fury. And she added, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "I am also her mother." The silence that followed Catherine Bennett's introduction was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a bomb blast, when the world is still processing what just happened before the screaming begins. Marcus Reynolds blinked, his brain struggling to process the information like a computer trying to run software it wasn't equipped for. "Mother," he stammered, looking from the imposing woman in white to his trembling wife. "Sarah, you said your mother was. You said she was gone." Sarah finally looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time that morning. Her voice was steady now, fortified by the presence at her side. "I said she was gone from my life, Marcus. I didn't say she was dead. We were estranged until yesterday. Until I called her crying, telling her what you'd done to me." "Estranged," Catherine Bennett repeated, the word rolling off her tongue like a verdict. She moved around the defense table with the grace of a dancer and the purpose of a guided missile, taking the chair beside Sarah. "She didn't hug her daughter. Not yet. This was business." She placed a heavy burgundy leather briefcase on the table and snapped the gold latches open with two sharp clicks that echoed in the silent courtroom. "Sarah left home 20 years ago to escape the pressure of my world," Catherine said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "She wanted a simple life. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not for the Bennett name or the Bennett connections or the Bennett money." Catherine turned her gaze to Gerald Hutchins. The opposing lawyer was currently trying to make himself look smaller in his chair, like a man hoping to go unnoticed by a tiger. "Hello, Gerald," Catherine said pleasantly, the way one might greet an old acquaintance at a charity gala. "I haven't seen you since the Meridian Tech merger litigation in 2016. You were barely a third-year associate then, weren't you? Fetching coffee for the real lawyers and photocopying discovery documents." Gerald Hutchins cleared his throat, his face flushing a deep crimson that clashed with his charcoal suit. "Ms. Bennett, it is an honor. I didn't know you were admitted to the bar in New York." "I am admitted to the bar in New York, California, Washington, D.C., and before the International Court of Justice in The Hague," she replied, not breaking eye contact. "I generally handle constitutional law, multi-billion-dollar corporate mergers, and civil rights cases that make national headlines. But when my daughter called me at 3 in the morning, weeping so hard she could barely breathe, telling me that a mediocre real estate developer with a Napoleon complex was bullying her." Catherine paused, letting the insult land like a slap. "I decided to make an exception." "Objection!" Marcus yelled, jumping to his feet. Panic was starting to set in, crawling up his spine like ice water. "Personal attack. Who does she think she is?" "Sit down, Mr. Reynolds," Judge Patterson barked, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. The judge looked at Catherine with a mixture of reverence and healthy fear. Everyone in the legal world knew the name Catherine Bennett. She was a legend. She was known as the Iron Gavel. She had argued 17 cases before the United States Supreme Court and won 14. She had written the legal brief that helped overturn discriminatory housing practices in 3 states. She had taken on Fortune 500 companies and won settlements that funded entire non-profit organizations. She was the lawyer that other lawyers told their children about when they wanted to inspire them to greatness. She was a myth made flesh. "Ms. Bennett," Judge Patterson said, her tone respectful in a way it hadn't been all morning. "While your reputation certainly precedes you, we are in the middle of a preliminary hearing regarding asset division. Mr. Hutchins has filed a motion for default judgment based on Mrs. Reynolds's lack of representation." "Yes, I saw that motion," Catherine said, pulling a thick file from her briefcase. "It was cute. Sloppy but cute. Like a child's first attempt at calligraphy." She stood up and walked toward the bench, handing a thick stack of documents, easily 3 inches thick, to Officer Washington to give to the judge. She dropped a duplicate stack onto Gerald Hutchins's desk with a heavy thud that made him flinch. "Mr. Hutchins claims my client has no assets and no representation. That is now demonstrably moot. Furthermore, Mr. Reynolds claims that the assets in question, the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the beach house in the Hamptons, and the investment portfolio at Goldman Sachs, are his sole property, protected by a prenuptial agreement signed 7 years ago." "That prenup is ironclad," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "She gets nothing. She signed it willingly." Catherine turned to Marcus. She took off her sunglasses and tucked them into her jacket pocket. When she looked at him, Marcus felt like he was being examined by a scientist looking at bacteria under a microscope. "Mr. Reynolds, do you know who wrote the standard template for the spousal coercion clause used in the state of New York?" Marcus blinked. "What?" "I did," Catherine said softly, her voice dropping to an intimate, terrifying whisper. "In 1998, I drafted the legislation that defines exactly what constitutes coercion, duress, and undue influence when signing a marital contract. It's called the Bennett-Hargrove Marital Equity Act. Perhaps you've heard of it." She tapped the document on Gerald's table with one perfectly manicured finger. "And according to the sworn affidavit my daughter provided this morning, along with text message records recovered from the cloud server you thought you had wiped, you threatened to evict her elderly grandmother from her nursing home in Queens and cut off all financial support if Sarah didn't sign that prenuptial agreement the night before your wedding." The courtroom gasped. Several spectators in the back leaned forward, eyes wide. "That's a lie!" Marcus screamed, his face turning purple. Veins bulged on his forehead. "She's a liar. She's always been a liar." "We also have the text messages from that night," Catherine continued, her voice rising just enough to cut through his shouting. "Recovered from Apple's iCloud servers. Exhibit C, Your Honor." Judge Patterson flipped to Exhibit C in the thick binder Catherine had provided. Her eyebrows shot up. She read silently for a moment, her lips pressing into a thin, disapproving line. Gerald Hutchins was flipping through the pages frantically, his hands shaking. Sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead, despite the air conditioning pumping cold air into the courtroom. "Your Honor," Gerald croaked, his voice strained. We haven't had adequate time to review this evidence. This is an ambush. This violates discovery protocols." "An ambush!" Catherine laughed, and it was a terrifying sound, cold, sharp, and utterly without mercy. "Mr. Hutchins, you attempted a default judgment against a woman with no legal representation while your client openly mocked her to her face in open court. You don't get to complain about fairness." She turned back to address the room, her voice taking on the tone of a professor lecturing a classroom full of first-year law students. "Now, let's talk about the finances, shall we?" Catherine pulled out a second, even thicker binder from her briefcase. This one had red tabs sticking out from multiple sections. Mr. Reynolds claims his net worth is roughly $8 million. A respectable sum for a man of his limited talents. Marcus looked like he was about to have a stroke. His jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. However, Catherine said, her voice sharpening like a knife being drawn from a sheath, my team of forensic accountants, who, by the way, usually track terrorist financing networks for the Department of Treasury, spent the last 18 hours tracing the intricate web of shell companies Mr. Reynolds has been carefully constructing over the past 5 years. She dropped the second binder on the table. It appears, Your Honor, that Mr. Reynolds has been systematically funneling marital assets into a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands called Apex Global Holdings. The total amount hidden from my client is not $8 million. Catherine leaned in close to Marcus, her face inches from his. She could smell his expensive cologne, something woodsy and arrogant, mixed with the sharp tang of fierce sweat. It's $24 million. The courtroom erupted. Gasps and whispers filled the air like a sudden storm. Catherine straightened up, smoothing her white jacket. And since you failed to disclose these assets on your financial affidavit, which you signed under penalty of perjury this very morning, she turned to the judge with a smile that could freeze lava. That constitutes felony fraud, Your Honor. A Class E felony in New York, punishable by up to 4 years in state prison. Marcus slumped back into his chair like a puppet with its strings cut. He looked at Gerald with wild, desperate eyes. Do something, he hissed through clenched teeth. You're supposed to be the best. Do something. Gerald Hutchins looked at the documents spread in front of him. He looked at the judge, who was now glaring at Marcus with the kind of burning intensity usually reserved for violent criminals. Then he looked at Catherine Bennett, who was checking her perfectly manicured nails as if this were all just a minor inconvenience in her day. I need a recess, Gerald croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. Request denied, Judge Patterson said instantly, her voice cracking like a whip. I want to hear more about these Cayman accounts right now. Ms. Bennett, please proceed. Catherine smoothed her skirt and turned to face the judge fully. Thank you, Your Honor. But before we dive into the detailed forensic accounting, and trust me, it's fascinating, I'd like to address the matter of the mockery my client endured this morning regarding her supposed inability to secure legal representation. She walked back to Sarah and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Sarah looked up at her mother and smiled. A genuine, hopeful smile that hadn't touched her face in months. Marcus, Catherine said, her voice dropping to a conversational, almost intimate tone that somehow carried more menace than shouting ever could. You mocked my daughter because you thought she was weak. You thought that because she is kind, because she volunteers at animal shelters in Brooklyn, because she paints watercolors and teaches art to children in the Bronx, she must be defenseless. Catherine's eyes flashed with something dangerous. You mistook her silence for surrender. You mistook her kindness for stupidity. You thought that freezing her bank accounts meant freezing her options. She turned to the court reporter. Let the record show, Catherine stated clearly, each word deliberate and precise, that Mrs. Sarah Reynolds is now represented by Catherine Elise Bennett of Bennett, Crown and Sterling. And I am not here to negotiate a settlement, Mr. Hutchins. She looked at Marcus, and in her eyes was the cold, hard promise of absolute destruction. I am here to take everything. The houses, the cars, the hidden money, the reputation, the dignity. I am going to peel your life apart layer by layer, account by account, lie by lie, until you are left with exactly what you tried to leave my daughter with. Catherine paused for effect. Nothing. She turned to Gerald. Mr. Hutchins, would you like to cross-examine? The courtroom air had fundamentally shifted. What had started as a routine divorce hearing, A powerful man crushing his powerless wife had transformed into something else entirely. The few spectators in the back of the courtroom, mostly bored law clerks and retired court watchers, were now leaning forward in their seats, phones out, fingers flying across screens as they texted friends and colleagues that something historic was happening in courtroom 304. Judge Patterson rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of what promised to be a spectacular headache. "Mr. Hutchins, do you wish to cross-examine? Though I suppose there's no witness on the stand yet. Ms. Bennett, you have the floor." "Thank you, Your Honor," Catherine said, standing tall and commanding. "I call Marcus Reynolds to the stand as a hostile witness." Marcus froze like a deer in headlights on the Hutchinson River Parkway. He looked at Gerald with pleading, terrified eyes. "Do I have to?" "You're the plaintiff, you idiot," Gerald whispered harshly, wiping sweat from his upper lip with a monogrammed handkerchief. "You filed this case. Get up there. And for the love of God, don't lie. She knows everything. I don't know how, but she knows everything." Marcus walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like they were made of wet newspaper. He sat down, and Officer Washington swore him in with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. Marcus looked out at the courtroom, trying desperately to regain his composure. He was Marcus Reynolds. He was a successful real estate developer. He had closed deals worth millions. He had negotiated with banks, with investors, with city officials. This old woman was just bluffing. She had to be. "Catherine, let's talk about your company, Apex Global Holdings," Catherine continued, pacing slowly in front of the witness stand like a prosecutor in a murder trial. "You swore in your financial affidavit that your income last year was $400,000. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Marcus said quickly, desperately trying to regain control. The real estate market was down. Interest rates were rising. Profit margins were squeezed. It was a difficult year. "The market was down," Catherine mocked, her voice taking on a theatrical quality. "The market was so down that you could only scrape together $400,000. She turned to Judge Patterson. "Your Honor, I have here bank records from the First Caribbean International Bank in the Cayman Islands, obtained through an emergency subpoena I filed at 6 o'clock this morning. They show a wire transfer of $2 million entering an account controlled by Apex Global Holdings on December 15th of last year. The exact same day Mr. Reynolds claimed the market was so terrible." She held up a piece of paper, the bank letterhead clearly visible even from across the courtroom. "Mr. Reynolds, can you tell the court what you used that $2 million for?" Marcus stayed silent. His throat was dry. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears like a drum. "I'll help you," Catherine said, her voice softening in a way that was somehow more terrifying than if she'd been shouting. "You converted that $2 million into cryptocurrency. Specifically, an untraceable privacy coin called Monero that you stored on a hardware wallet. A hardware wallet that is currently sitting in a safety deposit box at the Grand Central branch of Chase Bank, box number 407. Marcus's jaw literally dropped open. How did you?" "I'm Catherine Bennett," she said simply, as if that explained everything. And in a way, it did. Finding hidden money is what I do. I've tracked down embezzled funds for pension funds. I've recovered assets stolen by dictators. You think I can't find a millionaire's crypto wallet?" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire silent courtroom. "Now, here is your problem, Marcus. You didn't declare that $2 million to the IRS. You didn't declare the cryptocurrency. And you certainly didn't share any of it with your wife, even when she was clipping coupons from the Sunday paper just to afford groceries at the Associated on 3rd Avenue. Catherine straightened up, her voice rising with righteous fury. "You mocked my daughter for not having a lawyer. You laughed at her poverty, poverty you engineered. You thought she was stupid because she's kind. But the only stupid thing in this room, Marcus, is thinking you could steal millions, hide it in offshore accounts and cryptocurrency wallets, parade your pregnant mistress around Miami Beach, and then have the audacity to ask for spousal support from the woman you betrayed. I didn't steal it, Marcus shouted, finally cracking under the pressure like ice breaking on the Hudson River in spring. It's my money. I earned it. She just sat at home painting stupid pictures of flowers and sunsets. She didn't contribute anything to the business. Why should she get half of my genius, my hard work, my vision? The courtroom went dead silent. Even the court stenographer stopped typing for a moment. Judge Patterson slowly removed her glasses and set them on the bench. She looked at Marcus Reynolds with an expression of such pure, concentrated disgust that several people in the gallery later said it was like watching a mother look at someone who had kicked her child. Mr. Reynolds, the judge began, then caught herself. Apologies. Mr. Reynolds, did you just admit on the record that the hidden money exists and that you intentionally concealed it to prevent your wife from receiving her equitable share? Marcus looked around the courtroom like a cornered animal. He looked at Gerald, whose face was buried in his hands. He looked at the gallery, at the spectators staring at him with a mixture of horror and fascination. He looked at Sarah, who was crying silently, her shoulders shaking. Marcus stammered. I didn't mean. No further questions for this witness, Catherine said, turning her back on him with dismissive finality. She walked back to the defense table and sat down next to Sarah, the click of her heels echoing in the stunned silence. Sarah was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief, of validation, of 12 years of gaslighting finally being exposed in the harsh light of legal truth. Catherine reached out and took her daughter's hand, squeezing it tight. It's okay, Catherine whispered, just loud enough for Sarah to hear. He's done. He buried himself. Gerald Hutchins was a man who prided himself on survival. In 23 years practicing divorce law in Manhattan, he had navigated treacherous waters involving hedge fund managers, celebrities, real estate moguls, and even a mafia underboss. He knew when to fight, when to settle, when to bluff, and most importantly, when to cut the rope and save his own neck. As Marcus Reynolds stumbled down from the witness stand looking like a boxer who had just gone 15 rounds with a heavyweight champion, Gerald was already doing the mental calculus that would determine his own future. Marcus had just admitted to perjury and fraud in open court. The judge was furious, not annoyed, not disappointed, but genuinely angry. And sitting across the aisle was Catherine Bennett, a woman with the power not only to win this case but to file ethics complaints with the New York State Bar Association that could strip Gerald of his license, his partnership, and his 7-figure salary. The equation was simple. Stay with Marcus, sink with Marcus. Cut loose, survive to bill another day. Gerald, Marcus hissed as he collapsed into his chair, his expensive suit wrinkled and damp with sweat. Fix this. Do something. Object to the crypto evidence. Say it was obtained illegally. Say she violated attorney-client privilege. Say something. Gerald didn't look at his client. He began methodically packing his briefcase, placing documents into folders with the careful precision of a man building a firewall between himself and a nuclear explosion. What are you doing? Marcus asked, panic rising in his voice like floodwater. Why are you packing? Gerald stood up. He buttoned his jacket with steady hands. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, professional, the voice of a man who had just made a decision that would haunt his client but save himself. Your Honor, Gerald said, addressing the bench. At this time, I must respectfully move to withdraw as counsel for the plaintiff, Mr. Reynolds. Marcus's eyes bulged. What? You can't quit. I paid you a $50,000 retainer. You work for me. Mr. Hutchins, Judge Patterson said, peering over her spectacles with a mixture of frustration and understanding. We are in the middle of a hearing. This is highly irregular, even for you. Your Honor, Gerald continued, choosing his words with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. An ethical conflict has arisen that makes it impossible for me to continue representing this client in good conscience. As an officer of the court, I cannot suborn perjury or participate in ongoing fraud. Based on the testimony my client just provided under oath, my continued representation would compromise my professional obligations under the rules of professional conduct. Translation: everyone in the courtroom understood. He lied. He got caught. And I'm not going down with this sinking ship. You coward! Marcus screamed, his face contorting with rage. He lunged at Gerald, grabbing the lawyer's lapel with both hands. I pay you. You're supposed to protect me. That's your job. Bailiff! Judge Patterson shouted, banging her gavel hard enough that it echoed like a gunshot. Officer Washington moved with surprising speed for a man of his size. He grabbed Marcus by the back of his expensive suit jacket and physically hauled him backward, slamming him back into his chair with enough force to make the wood creak. Sit down and shut your mouth, Washington growled, his hand resting meaningfully on Marcus's shoulder like a boulder. Or you're going to spend the rest of this hearing in a holding cell with the drunk drivers and shoplifters. Your choice. Marcus sat, breathing heavily, his tie askew, his perfectly styled hair now disheveled. He looked around the courtroom with wild, desperate eyes. He was alone. Truly, completely alone. Judge Patterson looked at Gerald with the expression of someone who understood the game being played but didn't have to like it. Mr. Hutchins, I am not granting your withdrawal motion at this moment. You will remain as counsel of record until this preliminary hearing concludes. You will sit there, and you will ensure your client's constitutional rights are protected. After this hearing is adjourned, you may file whatever motions you wish. But you are not abandoning your client in the middle of my courtroom. Are we clear? Gerald's face fell, but he nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Then sit down. Gerald sat, but he moved his chair a distinct 2 feet away from Marcus, as if proximity to his client might be contagious. Catherine Bennett watched this entire display with the cool detachment of a scientist observing bacteria in a petri dish. She stood up again, smoothing her white jacket. Your Honor, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a lighthouse beam through fog. Since Mr. Reynolds's counsel is still present, albeit reluctantly, I would like to call my next witness. This witness goes to the issue of character and credibility, specifically regarding Mr. Reynolds's petition for spousal support, which, I might add, he had the absolute audacity to file against my daughter, claiming she should support him during this difficult transition period. A few people in the gallery actually laughed. Nervous, disbelieving laughter. Call your witness, Judge Patterson said, sounding exhausted. I call Vanessa Martinez to the stand. Marcus's head snapped up. No, he whispered, his voice hoarse. She wouldn't. She promised she wouldn't. The courtroom doors opened again, and a young woman walked in. She was stunningly beautiful, late 20s, with long dark hair, wearing a modest navy dress that couldn't quite hide her very pregnant belly. She looked terrified, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, clutching a small purse in front of her like a shield. She walked down the center aisle, and as she passed Marcus's table, he reached out his hand desperately. Vanessa, baby, don't do this. Please. We can fix this. I love you. Vanessa flinched away from him as if he were radioactive waste. She didn't say a word. She just kept walking. She took the stand. Officer Washington swore her in. Her hand trembled as she raised it. Miss Martinez, Catherine said gently, her voice softening in a way it hadn't all morning. Thank you for coming. I know this is incredibly difficult. Can you tell the court your relationship to the plaintiff, Marcus Reynolds?" Vanessa took a shaky breath. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. I was his girlfriend for the last 2.5 years. Was? Catherine asked. Yes, Vanessa said, her voice gaining strength. I broke up with him yesterday morning. After Mrs. Bennett showed me the text messages Marcus sent to his other girlfriend in Chicago, and the woman in Los Angeles, and the woman in Boston. The courtroom erupted again. Even Judge Patterson looked shocked, her hand going to her forehead. Order! Judge Patterson banged her gavel. Order in this court. Catherine waited for the noise to die down. Miss Martinez, during your relationship with Mr. Reynolds, did he ever discuss his wife, Sarah, with you? All the time, Vanessa said, and now there was anger in her voice. Righteous, burning anger. He told me she was crazy. He said she was a burden, dead weight. He said she was. She paused, looking at Sarah with genuine pity and shame. He said he was going to destroy her in court. He bragged about it. He said it was going to be fun. He called it taking out the trash. Sarah covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. He told me, Vanessa continued, her voice rising with emotion, that he had hired the best lawyer in New York. He said Sarah was too stupid to fight back. He said he was going to make her homeless, so she would have to come crawling back to him, begging for help. He said he wanted to own her. He said that's what she deserved for being ungrateful. Catherine let the words hang in the air. They were ugly. They were cruel. And they painted a picture of Marcus Reynolds that was far darker than even his financial crimes. Miss Martinez, Catherine said softly, did Mr. Reynolds tell you that his wife didn't know about you? Yes, Vanessa whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. He said they had an arrangement. He said she knew and didn't care. But then Mrs. Bennett showed me the text messages from 2 months ago where Sarah was begging Marcus to come to marriage counseling, saying she still loved him, asking what she had done wrong. Vanessa looked directly at Sarah. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. If I had known, I never would have. I'm so sorry. Sarah nodded through her tears, unable to speak. Catherine turned to Gerald. Your witness, Mr. Hutchins. Gerald looked at Vanessa, then at Marcus, who was staring at the table with the hollow eyes of a man watching his entire life collapse in real time. Gerald looked at Judge Patterson, who was glaring at him expectantly. No questions, Your Honor, Gerald said quietly. Miss Martinez, you may step down, Judge Patterson said. Thank you for your testimony. Vanessa stood up, placed a hand protectively over her pregnant belly, and walked out of the courtroom without looking at Marcus once. Judge Patterson took off her glasses and cleaned them slowly with a cloth from her desk drawer. She took her time, letting the silence stretch, letting everyone absorb what they had just witnessed. When she put her glasses back on and looked at Marcus Reynolds, her expression could have frozen the East River in August. Mr. Reynolds, the judge began, her voice dangerously quiet. In my 22 years on the bench, presiding over thousands of divorce cases, custody battles, and domestic disputes, I have seen some truly despicable human behavior. I have seen people fight over dogs, over photo albums, over grandmother's wedding china. I have seen parents use their children as weapons. I have seen abuse, manipulation, and cruelty in forms that would shock most people. She paused, letting her words sink in. But I have rarely, very rarely, seen a display of such calculated malice, such systematic cruelty, such breathtaking arrogance as I have witnessed here today. Marcus didn't look up. He just stared at the table, his jaw clenched. You came into my courtroom, Judge Patterson continued, her voice rising with each word, and you mocked the judicial process. You mocked your wife, a woman you promised to love and cherish. You attempted to weaponize this court, to use the legal system as a tool to abuse and humiliate a woman who trusted you. You committed perjury. You committed fraud. You hid millions of dollars while your wife couldn't afford groceries. The judge turned to Sarah, and her expression softened. Mrs. Reynolds, I owe you an apology. This court should have protected you sooner. I should have seen through his tactics the moment he started mocking you. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue Catherine handed her. However, Judge Patterson said, her voice hardening again as she turned back to her paperwork, I am now in a position to rectify that failure. She picked up her pen, and the sound of it clicking open was like a judge's hammer falling. I am issuing a temporary ruling effective immediately. The final judgment will follow once Ms. Bennett's forensic accounting team completes a full audit of Mr. Reynolds' assets, every single penny, every cryptocurrency wallet, every offshore account, every shell company. She began writing, narrating as she went. First, I am freezing all assets belonging to Marcus Reynolds, Apex Global Holdings, Coastal Holdings LLC, and any other entity he controls directly or indirectly. Access to these accounts is granted solely to Mrs. Sarah Reynolds and her counsel for the purposes of securing her financial position during this proceeding. Marcus made a strangled sound, somewhere between a groan and a whimper. Second, I am awarding Mrs. Reynolds immediate exclusive use and occupancy of the marital residence at 847 Fifth Avenue, as well as the beach house in East Hampton. Mr. Reynolds, you have exactly 4 hours from the time we adjourn to vacate both properties. You may take your clothes, toiletries, and personal items only. If you remove a single piece of furniture, a single painting, a single spoon from the kitchen, I will have you arrested for theft and contempt. Officer Washington will escort you to ensure compliance. Third, Judge Patterson said, looking directly at Gerald Hutchins. Mr. Hutchins, I am referring the complete transcript of today's hearing to the New York County District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges regarding perjury, wire fraud, tax evasion, and whatever other charges they deem appropriate. I am also referring this matter to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Gerald nodded quickly. Yes, Your Honor. I will cooperate fully with any investigation. You'd better, the judge said coldly. Because if I find out you knew about any of this beforehand, you'll be sharing a cell with your client. Finally, Judge Patterson said, looking at Catherine with something approaching respect, Ms. Bennett, regarding attorney's fees and costs. Catherine smiled. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Reynolds will pay 100% of Mrs. Reynolds's legal fees, costs, and expenses incurred in this matter, including but not limited to forensic accounting, expert witnesses, and your hourly rate. Given your reputation and standard billing practices, I imagine that will be quite substantial. Very substantial, Your Honor, Catherine agreed. My hourly rate is $1,250. My team has already logged approximately 70 billable hours in the last 24 hours alone. Marcus did the math in his head. He looked like he might vomit. Judge Patterson banged her gavel one final time. This preliminary hearing is adjourned. We will reconvene in 45 days for a full hearing on final asset division. Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you get yourself a new lawyer and a good therapist. You're going to need both. All rise, Officer Washington called out. Judge Patterson swept out of the courtroom, her robes billowing behind her. As the room began to clear, Marcus sat frozen in his chair. His life was over. In less than 2 hours, he had gone from a multi-millionaire playboy to a potential felon with nowhere to sleep, no access to his money, and a pregnant mistress who hated him. He looked up to see Catherine and Sarah packing their briefcases. Sarah looked different. She stood straighter. The weight that had been crushing her for months, maybe years, was gone. She looked lighter, younger, free. Marcus stood up, his legs shaky like a newborn deer. He walked over to them, each step feeling like he was walking toward his own execution. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, please. You can't do this. Where am I going to go? We can talk about this. We can work this out. I made mistakes, okay? I admit that. But you can't just take everything." Sarah looked at him. For 12 years, she had looked at this man with love, with hope, with a desperate need for his approval and affection. Now she just looked at him the way you might look at a stranger on the subway, with mild disinterest and the vague hope that they wouldn't sit next to you. Before she could answer, Catherine stepped in between them, physically placing herself as a wall between her daughter and the man who had tormented her. She towered over Marcus, even though they were roughly the same height. Her presence was a physical force, and he actually took a step backward. "Mr. Reynolds," Catherine said, her voice colder than a January wind off the Hudson River. "My daughter doesn't speak to criminals. If you have anything to say, anything at all, you can direct it to my junior associate." She gestured to Toby, one of the young lawyers behind her. He was a sharp-looking man in his 30s with wire-rimmed glasses and the eager expression of someone who enjoyed crushing opposing parties. "Toby," Catherine said, "give Mr. Reynolds your card in case he needs to communicate anything regarding the property transfer." Toby handed Marcus a business card with the enthusiasm of someone handing a parking ticket to someone who just parked in a handicapped spot. "Now," Catherine said, taking Sarah's arm gently, "get out of our way. We have a celebratory lunch reservation at Gramercy Tavern, and I believe my daughter has some painting to catch up on. 12 years of it, actually." They walked past him. Sarah didn't look back. Marcus watched them walk toward the heavy wooden doors, watched them push through into the bright hallway beyond. He watched the doors swing shut with a heavy final thud that sounded like the closing of a tomb. He looked at Gerald Hutchins, who was already on his phone, presumably calling his own lawyer to discuss how to distance himself from this disaster. He looked at Officer Washington, who was watching him with undisguised contempt. Marcus Reynolds was alone. But outside those courtroom doors, standing on the marble steps of the New York County Supreme Court building at 60 Center Street, blinking in the bright midday Manhattan sunlight, the story wasn't quite over. Catherine and Sarah stepped out into the cool autumn air. The sounds of the city surrounded them. Taxis honking on Worth Street, the rumble of the subway beneath their feet, the chatter of people flowing past on their lunch breaks. A black Mercedes sedan pulled up to the curb. But it wasn't Catherine's car. The driver got out and opened the back door. A man stepped out. He was older, maybe mid-70s, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by an artist who specialized in stern disapproval. He wore an immaculate gray suit that probably cost more than some people's cars. He looked at Catherine, then at Sarah. Sarah froze. "Oh God!" Catherine stiffened, her grip tightening on her briefcase. "Hello, Richard." Richard Bennett, Catherine's ex-husband, Sarah's father, stood there on the sidewalk, his hands in his pockets, looking at the two women he hadn't seen together in 20 years. "Catherine," he said, his voice deep and commanding even over the noise of New York traffic. "Sarah, I heard about the hearing. Word travels fast in legal circles. The iron gavel returns to the courtroom. Quite the performance, from what I'm told." "What do you want, Richard?" Catherine asked sharply, her voice taking on a defensive edge that hadn't been there in the courtroom. "I want to talk to my daughter," Richard said, looking at Sarah. "It's been 20 years, Sarah. That's a long time." Sarah looked at her father, the man who had pushed her to marry Marcus in the first place because it was a good business connection, the man who had told her she was being foolish for wanting to be an artist, the man who had chosen his business empire over his daughter's happiness at every turn. "I don't have anything to say to you," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to form. "I understand," Richard said, and for the first time, there was something in his voice that might have been regret. I understand why you'd feel that way. I made mistakes. I put business before family. I thought I was teaching you to be strong, to be practical, but I pushed you away. He took a step closer. But I'm here now, and I want to help. Catherine laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. Help? Richard, where were you 3 months ago when Sarah called you crying, telling you Marcus had frozen her accounts? Where were you when she needed her father? I thought she was being dramatic, Richard admitted, his face reddening slightly. I thought it was normal divorce conflict. I didn't know the extent of his. I didn't know he was that kind of man. You didn't want to know, Catherine corrected. Because knowing would have meant admitting you were wrong about him. Richard didn't deny it. He turned to Sarah. I was wrong. About Marcus, about a lot of things. I'm sorry, Sarah. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am genuinely sorry. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. Part of her, the little girl who had desperately wanted her father's approval, wanted to forgive him, to hug him, to have her father back. But the woman she had become, the woman who had survived 12 years of emotional abuse and come out the other side, knew better. Thank you for the apology, Sarah said quietly. But I need time. A lot of time. You can't just show up after 20 years and expect everything to be okay. Richard nodded slowly. I understand. But Sarah, I want you to know, if you need anything, anything at all, I'm here. I mean it this time. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. This is a cashier's check. $1 million. No strings attached. It's yours. Use it to start your art studio, use it to travel, use it to burn in a fireplace if it makes you feel better. But it's yours. He held it out. Sarah looked at the envelope, then at her mother. Catherine's expression was unreadable. It's your choice, sweetheart. Sarah took a deep breath. She stepped forward and took the envelope from her father's hand. Thank you, she said. But this doesn't fix things between us. This is just a start. Maybe. That's all I'm asking for, Richard said softly. A chance to start over. Sarah nodded. Then she turned back to her mother, who wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders. We need to go, Catherine said to Richard. We have a lunch reservation. Of course, Richard said. He got back into his car, but before the driver closed the door, he looked at Sarah one more time. I'm proud of you. I know I never said that enough. But I'm proud of the woman you've become, despite everything. The door closed, and the Mercedes pulled away into Manhattan traffic, disappearing among a sea of yellow cabs and delivery trucks. Catherine looked at her daughter. Are you okay? Sarah nodded, clutching the envelope. Yeah, I think I am. Good, Catherine said, flagging down a taxi. Because I'm starving, and we have 20 years of catching up to do over the best duck breast in Manhattan. 3 months later. The gallery in Chelsea was packed wall to wall with people. Waiters in black ties circulated with trays of champagne and artisanal hors d'oeuvres. The lighting was perfect. Warm spotlights illuminating the large, vibrant canvases hanging on the pristine white walls. The exhibition was titled Rebirth, A Journey Through Fire. Sarah stood in the center of the main gallery room, wearing a stunning crimson dress that fit her perfectly. Custom-made, a gift from her mother. She held a glass of sparkling water in one hand, laughing with a group of art collectors who were practically fighting over the price of her centerpiece painting. The painting, titled The Gavel, depicted a stylized courtroom scene rendered in bold, emotional strokes. In the center was a figure of brilliant light breaking through chains of oppressive darkness. It was powerful, raw, painful, and undeniably brilliant. It's magnificent, Mrs. Reynolds. A collector in an expensive suit gushed. Sold. I don't care about the price. Name it. Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Thank you. That means more to me than you know. From the corner of the room, Catherine Bennett watched with unconcealed pride. She was sipping a dirty martini, looking elegant as always in a black cocktail dress. She wasn't just a lawyer anymore. She was a mother, fully present in her daughter's life, attending gallery openings and Sunday brunches and making up for 2 decades of absence. Catherine's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, a news alert from the New York Times. Former real estate developer Marcus Reynolds sentenced to 6 years for wire fraud and tax evasion. Catherine tapped the article. There was a mugshot of Marcus looking haggard, his expensive suit replaced with an orange jumpsuit. The article detailed his conviction, how he'd been found guilty on 14 counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and perjury. It mentioned the millions he'd hidden, the cryptocurrency the FBI had seized, and the testimony from his own lawyer that had sealed his fate. He had lost everything. The money, the properties, the women, his freedom, and every shred of his reputation. Catherine smiled, took a sip of her martini, and put the phone away. She didn't need to read the rest. She had been in the front row for the sentencing 3 weeks ago, watching as the judge handed down 6 years in federal prison. She walked over to Sarah, weaving through the crowd of admirers. You have a red done on every single painting, Catherine noted, her voice warm with pride. You're completely sold out. The gallery director told me they've already got a waiting list for your next show. I can't believe it, Sarah said, her eyes shining with happy tears. Mom, 6 months ago I was sleeping on a friend's couch, wondering if I'd ever paint again. And now you're exactly where you were always meant to be, Catherine said, pulling her daughter into a hug. You're stronger than you ever knew, Sarah. You survived him for 12 years. I just helped you finish the fight. The gallery door opened, and a young woman walked in. She was visibly pregnant now, maybe 8 months along. It was Vanessa Martinez. She looked nervous, uncertain, clutching a small purse. Sarah saw her and froze for a moment. Then she excused herself from the collectors and walked over. Hi, Vanessa said quietly. I'm sorry for just showing up. I saw the article about your show in Time Out New York, and I wanted to see your work. And I wanted to apologize again, in person, when it wasn't a courtroom. Sarah looked at this young woman, the mistress, the other woman, the person who had unknowingly been part of Marcus's web of lies. How are you? Sarah asked gently. How's the baby? Vanessa's hand went protectively to her belly. She's good. Healthy. I'm raising her alone. Marcus. Well, you know where Marcus is. I know, Sarah said. Then, surprising herself, she added, Would you like to see the paintings? Vanessa looked shocked. Really? After everything? You didn't know, Sarah said simply. He lied to both of us. And that baby deserves to have a mother who isn't carrying hatred around. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. You're much kinder than I deserve. Maybe, Sarah said with a small smile. But I've learned that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So I'm choosing to let it go. She gestured to the paintings. Come on. I'll tell you about each one. Catherine watched from across the room as her daughter, the woman Marcus had tried to break, the woman he had mocked and belittled and stolen from, showed compassion to the young woman who had been caught in the same trap. Catherine raised her martini glass in a silent toast to her daughter's strength. Outside the gallery, the lights of Chelsea twinkled against the dark New York sky. Somewhere in a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania, Marcus Reynolds was learning that the expensive suits don't mean much when everyone's wearing the same uniform. He was discovering that the charm that had worked on investors and mistresses didn't work on prison guards and inmates. He thought about Sarah every day, not with love or regret, but with burning resentment that she had done this to him. Because narcissists never accept responsibility. Even sitting in a cell, he convinced himself he was the victim, that Sarah and her mother had conspired to destroy an innocent man. But back in that Chelsea gallery, Sarah wasn't thinking about Marcus at all. She was laughing with Vanessa about the absurdity of pregnancy cravings. She was accepting congratulations from collectors and art critics. She was planning her next series, something about rebirth after trauma, about finding your voice after years of silence. She was living. And sometimes, that's the best revenge of all. Catherine walked up beside Sarah as the evening was winding down. "So," Catherine said, linking her arm through her daughter's. "What's next for the famous artist Sarah Reynolds?" Sarah smiled, looking around at the empty walls where her paintings had hung just hours before, all of them now headed to new homes, new lives. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "I want to change my name back. To Sarah Bennett. I'm done being Sarah Reynolds." Catherine squeezed her daughter's arm. "Sarah Bennett. That has a nice ring to it. And I want to start a foundation," Sarah continued, her voice gaining confidence. "For women going through divorces who can't afford lawyers. I want to use part of the settlement money, the money Marcus tried to hide, and I want to help other women who are where I was 6 months ago." Catherine's eyes glistened with tears of pride. "That's a beautiful idea. Will you help me?" Sarah asked. "With the legal structure, the organization?" "Sweetheart," Catherine said, "I would be honored." They stood there together, mother and daughter, reunited after 20 years of estrangement, stronger for having gone through the fire. Outside, the city that never sleeps continued its eternal dance. Taxis honked on 10th Avenue. The High Line was filled with couples taking evening strolls. The Empire State Building glowed against the night sky. And in Courtroom 304 of the New York County Supreme Court, where this story began, the lights were off, the building quiet. But the record remained. The transcript of that day, the day Marcus Reynolds learned that silence isn't weakness, that kindness isn't stupidity, and that every now and then, the underdog gets a mother who is an absolute legal assassin, would remain in the court records forever. A cautionary tale. A reminder. A warning to anyone who thinks they can mock someone's poverty, their lack of power, their quiet dignity. Because you never know who's about to walk through that door. Sarah Reynolds, no, Sarah Bennett, had been mocked, belittled, and underestimated her entire marriage. But she didn't just survive. She didn't just win. She was reborn. And that makes all the difference. If you enjoyed this story of karma, justice, and the ultimate courtroom smackdown, remember that the quietest people often have the loudest backup. The woman sitting across from you, the one you think has no power? She might just have Catherine Bennett on speed dial. Never underestimate kindness. It's not weakness. It's just patience waiting for the right moment to strike. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. Stories like this remind us that dignity, resilience, and quiet strength often speak louder than revenge ever could. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about courage, consequences, and redemption. Your support helps us tell stories that matter. And remember, sometimes the strongest response isn't anger, it's becoming unbreakable. See you in the next video.